Right now, as you're watching this, over 300,000 homes across the United Kingdom are sitting on the market with no buyers in sight, and what's happening behind the scenes at number 10 Downing Street is nothing short of pure panic. This is the housing crisis moment that nobody predicted, and if you're not subscribed to UK Housing Watch yet, hit that button now because you cannot afford to miss what we're covering every single day as this situation unfolds. The Prime Minister is facing a nightmare scenario where the property market, long considered the backbone of British wealth and economic stability, is showing cracks that even the most optimistic government spin doctors cannot paper over. Let me break down exactly what is happening, why it matters to you whether you're a renter desperate to buy, a homeowner watching your equity, a landlord calculating your next move, or a pensioner relying on property wealth for your retirement security. The numbers coming out of Rightmove and Zoopla in recent weeks have been staggering, and here's the first twist that nobody in mainstream media is talking about. The official figures you're seeing are actually understating the problem because they don't account for the shadow inventory of homes that have been quietly withdrawn from sale after months of failing to attract offers. Estate agents across the country, from Manchester to Bristol to Edinburgh, are reporting that sellers are pulling listings rather than accepting the brutal price reductions that would be necessary to actually complete a transaction. This creates an illusion that the market is smaller and healthier than it really is, when in reality there's a hidden reservoir of desperate would-be sellers waiting on the sidelines, watching, hoping, and growing increasingly anxious. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting for first-time buyers who have been priced out for years. This moment of seller panic could be your window of opportunity, but only if you understand the game being played. Lenders are still offering mortgages, rates have stabilized somewhat after the chaos of recent years, and for the first time in a decade, buyers have genuine negotiating power. I've spoken to mortgage brokers who tell me they're seeing offers accepted at 15, sometimes 20% below asking price in areas that were previously untouchable for average earners. The question is whether you have your finances ready to pounce, because hesitation in this market could mean missing out on once-in-a-generation value. Now let me explain why the Prime Minister is genuinely worried, and this goes far beyond simple housing statistics. The entire British economic model depends on property values remaining stable or rising. When hundreds of thousands of homes fail to sell, it creates a cascading effect that touches every part of the economy. Stamp duty receipts collapse, meaning less money for public services. Homeowners feel poorer and spend less on the high street. Developers halt new builds because they can't make the numbers work, which means construction jobs disappear and the supply crisis gets even worse long-term. Planning delays are already choking the pipeline of new housing, and now developers are actively mothballing projects because they're terrified of building homes that will sit empty and unsellable. Here's the second twist that will shock you. Some of the biggest house builders in the country are sitting on land banks worth billions of pounds. But they refuse to build because flooding the market with supply would crater prices further and destroy their existing inventory values. They'd rather let housing shortages continue than risk their share prices. This is the dirty secret of British housing that politicians rarely discuss publicly because developers are major donors and lobbyists. But what about landlords, you might be asking? Surely they're benefiting from all this chaos in the sales market. Well, here's where things get complicated, and where we see the third twist nobody is covering properly. Yes, rental demand is through the roof. Yes, rents are climbing in virtually every major city, and increasingly in smaller towns too. But landlords are facing a perfect storm of higher mortgage costs on their buy-to-let portfolios, stricter EPC regulations that require expensive upgrades, and the looming threat of further regulation that makes long-term investment calculations almost impossible. I'm hearing from landlords every week who are selling up entirely, not because they want to exit, but because the numbers simply don't work anymore. When a landlord sells, that's often one less rental property available, which pushes rents even higher for tenants who are already stretched to breaking point. The government's failure to create a coherent strategy for the private rental sector is creating a doom loop that punishes everyone except the very wealthy who can wait out the chaos. Pensioners and those approaching retirement are in a particularly precarious position that deserves special attention. For decades, conventional wisdom in Britain was that your home was your pension supplement, the asset you could downsize from or release equity against to fund your later years. But when homes fail to sell, that strategy falls apart completely. I've heard heartbreaking stories of couples in their 70s who need to release funds for care home fees or simply to maintain their standard of living, but they cannot find buyers for their family homes. The chain is broken and they're trapped. Properties that would have sold within weeks 5 years ago are now languishing for 6 months, 12 months, sometimes longer. Every month of delay is another month of financial stress, another month of uncertainty, another month of watching the news wondering whether things will ever improve. But here's twist number 4, and this one might actually give you hope if you're feeling overwhelmed. The market is not collapsing uniformly across the country. There are postcode winners and postcode losers, and understanding this geography could be the difference between a smart property decision and a catastrophic mistake. Cities with strong employment growth, good transport links, and genuine housing shortages are holding up remarkably well. We're talking about certain commuter towns, university cities with major hospitals and expanding tech sectors, and areas benefiting from infrastructure investment. Meanwhile, some traditionally expensive areas, particularly in parts of southern England where prices stretched to absurd levels during the pandemic boom, are seeing the steepest falls. The stamp duty burden alone in these areas is enough to deter many buyers, and without that constant flow of transactions, even wealthy markets can seize up entirely. Homeowners in these areas need to seriously consider whether now is the time to accept a lower offer rather than waiting for recovery that may take years to materialize. The fifth and perhaps most shocking twist is what's happening with repossessions, and this is where government panic becomes most understandable. Lenders have been remarkably patient over the past 2 years, offering forbearance arrangements and extending mortgage terms to help struggling borrowers. But that patience is starting to wear thin. Behind closed doors, I'm hearing that major banks are preparing for a significant increase in repossession proceedings over the coming months. They've held back partly because mass repossessions would flood the market and crash prices further, hurting their balance sheets. But there's a limit to how long they can carry non-performing loans, and we may be approaching that limit. When repossessions begin hitting the market in larger numbers, it will put even more downward pressure on prices and create even more panic among sellers who are already struggling to find buyers. This is the scenario that terrifies number 10, because repossessions mean human suffering, negative headlines, and political damage that no amount of spin can overcome. What happens next is genuinely uncertain, and anyone who tells you they know exactly how this plays out is either lying or deluded. But there are indicators we can watch together, and this is why staying informed through channels like UK Housing Watch is so critical right now. Watch mortgage approval figures closely because any sustained drop signals further pain ahead. Watch what happens with new build completions and developer share prices. Watch rental market data because rising rents can actually prevent sales market recovery by trapping would-be buyers in cycles of high housing costs that prevent them saving deposits. And crucially, my advice is harder to hear but equally important: price realistically from day one, present your property immaculately, and do not let ego or attachment to a number blind you to market reality. Properties priced correctly are still selling. It's overpriced stock creating these terrible statistics. For everyone watching from the sidelines wondering whether this is the crash that makes housing affordable for normal working people, I must be honest, probably not. The fundamental supply shortage in Britain means prices are unlikely to fall to levels that would genuinely transform affordability. What we're seeing is a market readjustment, painful for many, opportunistic for some, but not a systemic reset. The housing crisis requires political solutions that neither major party seems willing to deliver, and that's a conversation